Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Sean O'Keefe. I'm a member of the Board of Directors here at the Atlantic Council, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this panel discussion on our Captains of Industry series. The mission of the series is to provide a platform from which business executives involved in defense and security issues can address the public interest their companies serve and the public policies that shape their markets. Today's topic, global suppliers for defense and security, features 4 such executives, each of whom leads the U.S. business unit of a global company that are chartered in Europe. A situation rife with interesting dimensions of public interest and public policy as well as its regulation thereof. As a former executive at the Airbus Group's U.S. operations here in Washington, it's a element that I've came to know a lot more about than I ever dreamed or imagined I'd ever want to know. And Steve Grudman, who produces this series, will introduce and moderate the panel. He asked if I used a portion of the welcoming comments here to reflect a little bit on that prior experience. This is a real challenge. There's no question that the nature of the market as well as the nature of the companies that we're going to be talking about and with from the chief executive officers today are in a different kind of situation in terms of the means by which they can compete or are permitted to compete in this broader market. I've observed and listened to several regulators, defense policymakers, et cetera, over the course of the last several years, observed that it is really ideal to work with companies of the caliber and nature of the folks that you're going to be talking to and hearing from today, because from a compliance standpoint, that these companies that are work through the various regulations as well as the special security agreements that are required for them to do business typically have a stronger compliance record than any U.S. chartered company. I took that as very, very small consolation given the nature of the investment that was necessary to make and how much more productive and competitive each of these companies needed to be and need to be in order to successfully compete in the markets they have been asked to lead the operations here in the United States to conduct. So at least there's a recognition of that, and yet at the same time one that puts a special consideration and challenge on companies that are frequently invited by, I think, the broader defense acquisition community to want to participate in order to raise the competitive bar and to produce the opportunity for a wider array of selection of choices. But at the same time, these are factors that they must consider as they work through the challenges to be those successful competitive companies going forward. So I'm now pleased to hand this off to Steve Grudman, who has done a masterful job over the course of quite some time now with this Captains of Industry series, and I commend he and the Atlantic Council for the extraordinary work that they've done to enlighten on a wide range of issues. Steve Grudman.
Take the stage and step into their seats, or sit on them, I suppose. Might be the better way to go. Thank you very much, Sean. I appreciate that. It was all too obvious when we set out to have this discussion that I didn't have to look far down the roster of the board of directors of the council to find someone to get the conversation started who, as he has observed and as would be well known to many of you in the room, a topic that he, as he said, has a lot of experience in, and also some experience from the other side of the regulatory table, which he didn't so much allude to, but maybe we might draw him out on that later. So this is a panel discussion that I've had in mind to do almost from the start of our Captains of Industry series. Ultimately and remarkably, we were able to find a day, the week after the Paris Air Show, when all 4 of these chief executive officers could be here in one place. So it's a special opportunity, one that has been percolating for some time. Before breaking into hearing from each of them, I want to offer a little bit of my own, I guess one might say personal reflection on the topic, which actually goes back to my service in government at the end of the 1990s when I was the Deputy Undersecretary for Industrial Affairs. And at the time, among the, I was going to say mandates, more like commandments I had from Deputy Secretary John Hamre and the rest of the folks for whom I was working there, to promote, take yourselves back to 1999 now, to promote a transatlantic defense industrial integration initiative, which we did, which at the time we were quite self-conscious about doing and the purposes for doing. There was a political purpose to it, which was to create another tendon that would help keep the alliance, the transatlantic alliance, NATO in particular, but the broader transatlantic alliance bound together. At a time when quite actually, I think less so by a lot than today, there were forces to disintegrate or at least muddy the proximity of the members of the alliance across the Atlantic Ocean. There was a strategic military purpose, which is the longstanding one of commingling and gaining best-of-breed technologies from the larger industrial bases of Europe and the United States, and not least to develop systems and deploy systems that were, relatively more than less interoperable with one another. So that was a long-standing purpose, but it was combined with this political purpose and also then an economic purpose, which was, this was a period of time which in this market in the United States, we were at the beginning of more or less a fairly dense concentration of the defense industrial base from one that was a generally fragmented group of mid-sized companies into one that was a fair, at least at the first tier of the industry, had a pretty tight concentration of capability and therefore market power among 4, 5, or 6 companies. And one of the, again, self-conscious purposes of this transatlantic defense industrial integration initiative was to bring more participation into the market. So this was something, this ambition dates back to then and maybe before, but it was something that we literally had meetings in the Deputy Secretary's office about on a pretty regular basis back then. And I will also observe at the same time that there was some skepticism, maybe even a degree of cynicism with respect to this initiative, not least in Europe. It would have to be said. So at the end of 2000, I left office and went on to be doing other things. And lo and behold, 10 years later, I got invited to the TADIC conference at NATO by our friend Peter Flory, who at the time was the administrator for investment in, what is that proper title that he would have had, in NATO headquarters, Peter Flory, and TADIC, and I called him up and I said, well, what's TADIC? He said, what's TADIC? The Transatlantic Defense Industrial Cooperation Initiative, he said. And I thought to myself, well, maybe this thing really had this thing about which there was skepticism and some cynicism had actually taken root. And made some impressive progress. And so I put together a presentation which merely the impressionistic image of, I hope will convey my purpose, which was a little bit of a before. It was intended, I put this together for the purpose of this conference in Brussels back in, 5, 6 years ago, 2009. And the before was a picture of icebergs. Any of you who have trolled in this transatlantic thing for a while may actually recognize this iceberg, which was originally conceived by a fellow on my staff and became some kind of emblem for this initiative, for what we were after. And the idea of it was that while at the moment the icebergs were disconnected above the surface of the water, there was a substantial connection to these industrial bases beneath the water, and that over time we would close up this gap. Or at the least we would prevent the icebergs from floating away into their respective spheres. So this was the ambition at the time. And my expectations of it privately, or in retrospect, I have to admit, were modest. because the obstacles to creating a truly transatlantic defense industrial base, a truly integrated transatlantic defense industrial base, were immense, and you know, I was experiencing them and fighting them every day. But 10 years later, I asked my staff at the consulting firm I was working for to sort of document, write down the content of this transatlantic defense industrial relationship now, and there was a lot to it. This one will be harder to see, but it suffices to say it is an enumeration of licenses and teaming agreements and partnerships and joint ventures and alliances, and yes, even acquisitions of assets on both sides, European firms of American firms of European firms. And I had to admit to myself it was a lot more substantial than I think actually our grandest expectations of this possibility were 10 years, you know, prior to that, back in 1999. What that chart does not even enumerate, on the other hand, is the still more substantial integration of the industrial bases, which is represented here. Finally, I got to it, I assure you. And that is to say, not merely by acquisition, but investments in creating an indigenous presence, sometimes by acquisition, sometimes not so, in this market in the United States, on the part of you know, the great, and every one of these companies that's represented here is a great European industrial brand and company, creating indigenous businesses here in the United States. And so, again, it's a special opportunity to hear from the chief executives of these business units right here, all in one place at one time, and that's what we're here to do over the next roughly hour. The way we will do this is I've asked each of them in turn from my left to spend 5 or 10 minutes, not least, and I want you to know that I've asked them to tell us about their company, not because most of us in the room won't know something about them, but it would be good as a foundation for the conversation for all of us to understand both what is the larger company that they represent, and also what is the participation of that company in this very market. So when they do that, it's not because they've taken the opportunity of your earshot to advertise their companies, but because I've asked them to give us that foundation of knowledge about what their business is and what it is in this marketplace, and then to talk, as Sean alluded to at least give us a couple thoughts about the public interests their companies serve and the public policies that shape their market, and the particularly complex and indeed onerous in many respects public policies and regulations that shape the marketplace of these particular companies, as opposed to those that don't bear those additional burdens of participating in the market across an international boundary. I will then ask questions of them and make sure they haven't dodged anything really important, and then I absolutely will invite questions from those of you in the audience, which I'm grateful for your coming. Not least for that purpose, to get some interesting questions from those of you who are in the audience. A couple points of housekeeping. This event is public. It is fully on the record. It is being broadcast live, I think, over the website, and will be available when the event is over through our website. Consequently, if I, among other things, if I call on you to ask a question, please wait for one of our staff to bring you a microphone so you can identify yourself for the record, and not least so we can have some context for the question that you're asking. I also am compelled and even maybe delighted to tell you that we are tweeting this event from the handle AC Scowcroft and at the hashtag ACDefense. With that, let me introduce the 4 panelists, at least briefly, although the more complete biography of each of them is available to you in the piece of paper that you would have been handed or had available to you when you came in. But even so, let me just go left to right, giving you an introduction to first Mr. Michael Anderson, who's the president and CEO of Saab North America. Michael has a 30-year duration of work at Saab Technologies, in a number of different positions, leading other business units in Europe, as well as the business unit here. Thanks very much, Michael, for coming. He also, I would want to hasten to add, is also on the board of directors, shares a seat with Sean on the board of directors of the council. Peter Lengyel, no, well, what the heck? I'll follow this. It's not that hard to simply say Peter Lengyel, who's at the other end of the bracket, is the president and CEO of Safran USA. Peter, before taking that job or beginning work with Safran, he had another position before ascending to the presidency of it, was a career naval officer, U.S. naval officer, and among other interesting assignments, I believe he's a pilot, if I'm not mistaken.
TACO.
Okay, and was the naval attaché in among other places, Paris, perhaps not surprisingly. Judy Marks, swinging back over to this side to Michael's left. Judy is the president and CEO of Siemens Government Technologies Incorporated. She, before becoming the president of Siemens in 2011, had a long career in not just Lockheed Martin, but two of its illustrious predecessor companies, IBM and L'Oreal, if I'm not mistaken, right? References that also would take us back to the late 1990s. Those of you who don't realize that those are some brands that were integrated into what we now today know as Lockheed Martin. And then finally, Alan Pellegrini, who is the president and CEO of Thales USA. Alan's career before ascending to the presidency of Thales USA was in another business unit of Thales, but also more generally in the field of wireless communications and portable in-flight entertainment products. Those of you who fly airplanes, which means everyone here, I guess I don't quite want to invite you to ask him questions about the functioning and future wonders of in-flight entertainment, but he's the man. I'm telling you, he is the man on that very topic. All right, that and my jabbering out of the way now, I'm pleased to turn to the panel and start with Michael. Michael Anderson, please.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for the nice introduction, and thanks for inviting us to the panel.
Very welcome.
Very briefly, I'll give you some context about Saab. Saab was founded in 1937, about 80 years ago, and you can relax. I'm not going to go through every chapter, so I just want to make that time mark. But it's a company that's evolved. It's a privately held company, privately owned, and it's been evolved over the years. It was originally established as a company to produce fighter aircraft for the Swedish government back in the later part of the Second World War and so forth. And we stayed the course. We still produce, develop fighter aircraft for the Swedish government and globally as well for other customers.
He won't say it, but I will. The Gripen.
Yes, I'll get to that.
Oh, okay.
That's my second chapter. But the company has evolved, and one product that I'm sure many of you are familiar with is the car side, the car business. We exited and divested that business about 20 years ago. We had trucks and buses and various sorts of transportation products for quite some time. But the company we're talking about today was sort of starting to take shape around year 2000 and afterwards due to a number of acquisitions. And today we're Scandinavia's largest defense company with a turnover of about $3.5 billion and about 15,000 employees. So that's where we are today. And our portfolio is very broad today in the defense and security domain. Everything from the fighter aircraft Gripen to submarines these days. We just completed an acquisition last year of Kockums. And missiles, advanced ground combat weapon systems, radars, electronic warfare, C4I, civil security, commercial aerostructures. So it's a very, very broad portfolio for the size of this company. I'd like to bring up a few characteristics of the company that I think are quite important and sort of part of our DNA. One thing is we reinvest about 25% of our annual sales in R&D, which is considered to be fairly high. We're very high. And that's an average we've had over the last 5 years. Another thing is if we look at the transformation the company's been through, back in the year 2000 or a little bit earlier, we were pretty much 80% domestic business and 20% export. We completely reversed that within a period of about 10 years from the opposite, 80% export and 20% domestic. last year, I think we were pretty much 45% domestic due to some increased sales in Sweden. But there's been a major transformation, which has, I think, shaped the company, really. And I'll get back to that. So today, we have a global presence in 30 countries. We do business in 100 countries. And I think the fact that we've gone through this transformation and operating in a country originally that are fairly slim when it comes to funding in terms of R&D for our defense forces. We've learned the hard way to be agile, cost efficient, and innovative. So I think that's sort of general buzzwords, but it truly means something for our company. Again, so that means today we have a unique broad portfolio. If you compare to our peers and colleagues in the U.S. industry, we cover pretty much the same basis. We have offerings on all domains, but again, a relatively small in size. Our strategy is really to act global and operate local. That's sort of the business model and the strategy we had to deploy to grow our business globally. Due to many offset-type programs and similar, we had to grow business locally and become part of the local industry. And that applies here for what we've done in the U.S. as well. We've done business in the U.S. about 40 years, but I would say the last 10, it's been an increased focus for our company. We have today 6 operating units in the country. We have an air traffic management business up in Syracuse. We just recently established a joint venture with Digital Globe, Riken Systems, that do 3D technology, basically taking satellite imagery and converting it with our technology to 3D mapping. We have 4 defense-related businesses operating under one special security agreement. Saab Defense and Security USA is the brand name for the company, with one division focused on training solutions for ground forces in Orlando. We have one business unit in Lillington, North Carolina, for signature management products. We have a radar business up in Syracuse, Sensor Systems, and a support operation out in Sterling, Virginia as well. So that's our business units in the U.S. If we look at the way we do business in the U.S. market for Saab in general, we have a couple of different channels. One is where we have cutting-edge products that we can sell directly to the end customer, either through our local operating units or directly from Sweden. That's one part of the model. The other part is we partner with U.S. industry to either win programs domestically or win programs globally. And one particular program here in the U.S. right now is the Next Generation Air Force Trainer, the TX program, where we work together with Boeing, partner with Boeing to win that program, hopefully. And we continuously evaluate our product portfolio, what is applicable for this marketplace. What I just mentioned are a few examples, and that will continue. And we are investing in terms of technology, in terms of acquiring businesses and capabilities to grow here in the U.S. So I think I'm just going to leave it at that right now, and then I think save that.
That's a perfect introduction by me.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I will then turn to Judy.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks to the Atlantic Council, Sean. Appreciate it. We're delighted to be here. I have the privilege today to speak to you about Siemens, a company obviously headquartered in Munich, Germany, but with a fairly significant presence here in the United States. We have over 50,000 employees here in the United States, and we truly do believe we're local globally. We have employees in every state, every one of the 50 states and Puerto Rico, and we go to market here as an American company. I'll talk shortly about our special security agreement part of the company. But when you think about Siemens, I would ask you, we've gone through a lot of divestitures and acquisitions. We did about $22.2 billion US last year here, but I think what's really telling is $5.2 billion US we exported from any of our 70 manufacturing facilities here in the US. So we see ourselves not only in Germany as an export agent, but here in the United States as an export agent. And we find that as a key discriminator for us in creating jobs and hiring veterans, et cetera. But we are an infrastructure company, not IT infrastructure, but the pure infrastructure. You think of us for energy, power generation, decentralized energy, renewable energy. You may think about us for our mobility products, our locomotives that are driving the new Amtrak on the Northeast Corridor that some of you might be taking. We span a healthcare offering of healthcare equipment that we service the VA and DoD with so that they have the absolute state-of-the-art, everything from imaging equipment to clinical products. So we tend to think of ourselves as kind of the infrastructure and foundation for a lot of aerospace and defense companies. Specifically here in the U.S., we spend a little over $1 billion a year in R&D here, and that ties into our global network. But we've acquired many companies here. Some notable ones, Westinghouse for power generation, transmission, distribution, and delivery. UGS, which is the entire product life cycle business, which is headquartered here globally. So when you think about Teamcenter and NX and the computer-aided design, the collaboration tools, the computer-aided manufacturing tools that the aerospace industry and defense industry use, we're very proud to be involved in that. And obviously, as you do that, and our latest pending acquisition, obviously waiting for EU regulatory approval, is the acquisition of Dresser-Rand. So when you think about all the parts, you can start thinking about us as helping in the initial conceptualization of aerospace and defense products, moving towards design, and then being the propulsion systems, being the drives and motors, being the systems that power the bases, that convert DC to AC, that support all the classified data centers with power, or a lot of them. So we, for that reason, we continue to want to bring the scale of those products, commercial products and services, to the U.S. federal government and to the aerospace and defense companies. And how we do that is through a special security agreement company called Siemens Government Technologies, which is, we've got a single share. It's owned by Siemens, but following all the DSS protocols, as I know we all do, we have our own board of directors. And we chose a special security agreement company versus a proxy because Siemens wanted to be involved and wanted board seats. If the investment was going to be made to grow this market, which it is a growth market for Siemens, the goal was to have the involvement. And you can only do that through a special security agreement company with the inside directors. They're always outnumbered for security and classification reasons, and we all own that responsibility as the leaders. But that was the way we decided to go to market now. And if you think about our company with so much commercial business here, as well as federal and defense business, we're always finding that balance. We're always, as we make an acquisition like a Dresser-Rand, there are CFIUS implications for a part of the business. That wasn't the strategic reason that we acquired them. It was for our focus on oil and gas and compressors and turbines. But there's obviously some surface and subsurface technology that'll have to be absorbed in. So we offer a service to accelerate Siemens products and services to the government, and we also obviously hold all the classified employees. So we find it's a value. I know you touched on a few things or Sean did, in terms of a little bit of the excess costs that are involved in the overhead, and I think we'll talk about that later. But to us, again, to serve this large customer, we think it's absolutely worth it. And we think we bring the scale. If something needs to be built here, we've got the manufacturing to do, made in America and built in America. If not, we bring the scale and the investment of a global corporation. Think of us, 350,000 employees, about 78 billion euros last year, and we can bring that strength, again, to this government customer and to the aerospace industry.
Okay, thank you. Exactly the sort of orientation that I was hoping for to get us started. Alan.
Okay, Alan Pellegrini with Thales, and I thought I worked for a large company until hearing Judy's presentation. Now I feel quite puny here in the seat, but Thales, if you don't know, about 60,000 employees on a global basis, a bit over 15 billion in turnover, depending on what the exchange rate is today from euros to dollars. I'll get into our U.S. presence in a moment, but talking about Thales on a global scale, we are Paris headquartered, but like my colleagues' businesses, very much consider ourselves a global enterprise with significant industrial presence in many countries throughout the world, not the least of which is the United States. We really focus on, we're a technology company that focuses on 5 vertical markets. Space, we're one of the leading developers and producers of satellites in the world. Aviation, where we're a leader in both the front and the back end of the aircraft from an electronics perspective, and also one of the world leaders in air traffic management. Ground transportation, where we provide electronics for customers like New York City Subway, London Underground, Hong Kong. So if you're on a train or a metro rail, chances are we're providing some of the electronics that support those operations. Communications and security. We're a significant player on both the cybersecurity side, but also in physical security. So if you're thinking about oil and gas protection, airport surveillance, we're very much a big part of that. And then, of course, defense. And a lot of folks think of Thales as a defense contractor. Please bear in mind it's about 50% of what Thales is on a global basis, and you'll see in the U.S. it's actually substantially less than that. Underlying everything we do, however, is a common foundation of, I'd say, engineering expertise, and it really has to do with information flow and processing, starting with what we would consider the gathering or the sensor side of getting information to moving it securely across networks of various forms to then processing and making sense of that information. In the defense world, that's things like command and control, moving more and more into concepts like big data, which were very prominent. So that underlies everything we do. Now, as we turn to the U.S., I'd say we're pretty much a microcosm of the greater whole of Thales. We operate about 8 business units here in the U.S., each of which is aligned with one of those 5 vertical markets. We are about 70% commercial in the U.S., about 30% defense. We account for about $2 billion in total activity here with our companies. We both produce product locally to customers in the U.S., like airlines, for example, or the FAA, but we also do a substantial amount of exporting from the United States as well, perhaps about 50-50. We have about 3,000 employees here in the U.S. spread across about 20 sites and in a handful of states. Our biggest concentration in California, Florida, up in New Jersey, and also in Maryland. Focusing on the defense side of what we do, which I said represents about 1/3 or a little bit less of our activity in the U.S., we do business under a proxy, a bit different than my colleagues explained. And you'll hear, if you don't already know, that a proxy company, by definition, has a degree of autonomy associated with it and is managed by an outside board of directors with Thales as the single shareholder of that proxy company. We have, I would say, 4 business lines or business units that are folded up or aggregated within that proxy organization. Our primary strengths in defense are in communications and in sensor technology. Our strategy from a defense perspective is really to go to market where we have strong niche positions, where we've made substantial investments in technology and perhaps are differentiated as compared to the large, well-established U.S. industrial base. We also partner very assertively, I would say, with large primes and integrators, try to bring to their portfolio technology that will help them differentiate. And we've also been very active in joint venture arrangements. And in fact, we have what maybe perhaps be the longest standing significant joint venture, transatlantic based with Raytheon. It's headquartered in California and does air defense work with NATO being our biggest customer. So in a nutshell, that's our activity here in the U.S.
Terrific. Thanks very much. And Peter Langell, Safran.
Great, wonderful, and again, thank you for the
welcome.
opportunity. There's as you'll see, there's a lot of there are some striking similarities, but there are a lot of dissimilarities between our reasons for coming from our original locations, whether it be in France or Germany or Sweden, and then coming over and deciding to implant ourselves here on the U.S. coast and then grow from there. Our reasons are we're a Tier 1 technology company, so we started. We're the oldest aerospace propulsion company in the world. We started making engines literally before the Wright brothers and then applied them to aerospace applications. Over the years, we rolled up a lot of companies, not only in aerospace propulsion, but then again in aviation equipment. So as we say, we do everything on the plane except for the plane. sort of an Intel Inside type of approach to aerospace. Major systems in that context, the things that make the aircraft fly, put it up in the air and bring it down safely. We continue to expand that. We rolled up some space activities, and actually that's primarily the only activity that we have back in France and on the continent, on the other side of the Atlantic, that we don't have here implanted in the United States. That being said, when we merged with another acronym company, because the propulsion and equipment was an old name called SNECMA, it was an acronym, and we combined with another old company called SAGEM, which was Defense and Security, another acronym, we became Safran, which is not an acronym, even though you think it is. It actually means rudder blade in French, and the idea was to put all these seemingly disparate companies on the same boat, steering in the same direction or by the same stars. So that's been our trajectory. We've been here in the United States for over half a century now. We've been providing sort of under the radar because raise your hands if you've heard of Safran before. Go ahead and be honest, okay? Good, I'm encouraged. Michelle, thank you for your good work. Our communication instructor is here. But the idea was to come over here and, as Alan was saying, through partnerships, targeted partnerships. And with all due respect to TRS, which has done a wonderful job, the CFM is the longest-standing transatlantic cooperation program. But we're quite proud of that. It's not to denigrate TRS, because TRS, we actually have a joint venture back in France as well on laser and electronics. So there are large friendships. But our friendship with GE is a 50-50 joint venture, and it is extraordinarily successful, and we've become the 75% market share holder for 100-plus passenger center aisle aircraft, which is a rather extraordinary story in and of itself. What we do primarily, if you think of the pie, think of over 50% being aerospace propulsion. Think of a good quarter plus, almost going up to a third of being aviation equipment, and then about 10% and 10% being defense and security. Here in the United States, flip that paradigm almost exactly in the inverse. And what we have here is predominantly security. We're number one in biometrics. So we provide the FBI's fingerprint solution. That's the AFIS system. So if you see a crime show and it says, I've got a partial print, let's run it through AFIS, we're AFIS. We've been doing that for the FBI for about well over 20 years, almost 30 years now. We're number one in explosive trace detection systems. So the TSA baggage screening. We're not the people that slow you down. We are the people that speed up your bags going through the check bags, and we have over half of those small little systems with the pieces of felt that check for your hand baggage, et cetera, et cetera. Then that is about, well over a third of the employees here in the United States. Another significant portion, roughly a third plus, is the aviation equipment group company. So again, everything on the plane. Number one in landing systems, landing gear, wheels, and brakes. Number one in aircraft wiring solutions. Number one in power distribution systems, and number one in engine nacelles. So those are all the types of things that we do. We're number one in the world for helicopter engines. We're number one. We're on the light utility helicopter, the Coast Guard's Dolphin rescue helicopter. We're number one for helicopter avionics. These are all things that when we explain these to our DoD partners, they say, I've never heard of you, or I could never imagine, which speaks to one thing: it's the strength of partnerships. We come in and we came here and we placed ourselves here because of the strength of those partnerships, and we provide those capabilities. So just over the past few years, we have grown to over almost half of the U.S. states. We're in all 50, but we don't claim a place where we don't manufacture or assemble. We have roughly 7,000 jobs here out of roughly 69,000 jobs globally, and 20 billion euros, or 20 billion US dollars in revenue globally, 5 billion, a full quarter of it here in the United States. We do have one out of the 30 companies and joint ventures that we have here. We have one proxy and 2 SSAs, and the rest wholly owned subsidiaries of the foreign-owned parent company. So that's how we operate. We found it extraordinarily, I would say, remunerative to be here in the United States, in spite of some of the challenges. But it's tough to argue with a growth pattern that has found those successes.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. In spite of that last, more or less, endorsement, in a certain respect, of the way I set this conversation up, I nonetheless would like to come back to the panelists and ask your reaction to my, I guess, glass half full characterization of the decade and a half now since 1999, which is at least the date that for me I mark as kind of the point at which governments across the Atlantic started actually, as customers, all these companies thinking about and trying to instigate a closer integration of them, particularly in respect to defense and security, particularly. What was your reaction as you heard me offer that glass half full version of the trajectory of the integration of these markets and the openness of this market to these companies over the last 15 years? Anybody want to weigh in on that? Michael?
Well, I think the perspective always starts from where do you start? Where's your outlook?
Sure.
What's your expectations? And I think before we took a more in-depth analysis and made some decision to invest and create a stronger footprint, we knew the regulations, we know the challenges, and we just decided that this is what we're going to have to work with. And I think when you do that, it's helpful by default. If you have other expectations when you start, it's a little bit different. So,
Alan?
I would echo that. I mean, I have a more, I guess, maybe a fresher perspective to this question because I've been in my role about 3 years, and for the 10 years preceding, spent most of my time running commercial-oriented companies. You know, I do know, you know, in the past, the ambitions for Thales in the U.S. from a defense perspective, perhaps, were a bit more grandeur. But you know, by the time I took the role, I think we took a very pragmatic approach to what we could do here in the U.S. We have some outstanding technology and have made some great investments that put us in a very competitive position in a number of niche areas, primarily around sensors and communications. And we believe we can grow as a defense business in the U.S. with a focused kind of approach, working with the U.S. government directly where it makes sense, but also relying on partnerships. And I think if you take a pragmatic approach to going after the defense and security market as a foreign company, you can have success. I think there's been attempts to be larger by some companies. There's been attempts to be, I'd say, to play in the same league with the Lockheed Martins and others. And I think that's a tougher challenge than really playing to your strengths as a foreign company.
Okay. I guess maybe frankly, not that those were not, thank you, reasonable answers to my question, but as I was listening to them, I realized there was an ulterior question in my mind, which was, yeah, that was easy when the U.S. Defense Department's budget was growing at 7% a year from 2001 to 2010, right? And the point at which I had that presentation in Brussels was 2009. So again, an easy year, a peak year nearly. Is it different the last 5 years than it was those first 10 years, at least those of you who have been around it long enough to be able to characterize the difference if there is one?
From our
Peter.
perspective, I mean, we are, and we thank Defense News for constantly bringing this up. We're listed as a top 25 defense company, which is absolutely true, but that occurs because of the militarization of our commercially available products. So we've been pursuing a strategy of dual-use technologies literally for decades that magically ends up being the P-8 or the KC-135 or landing systems on the V-22 or the F-18, et cetera, et cetera. There are, as I've just learned, there are no major aircraft in the U.S. DoD inventory, that includes JSF and F-22, that don't have some portions. Now, the ones that are highly classified, typically that's going to be a wiring solution. So not a major stakeholder in any of those solutions. But on the P-8, for instance, it's the engines in partnership with GE. It's wheels and brakes. It's all the wiring systems. It's everything that's on a 737. So that, to us, makes the investment worthwhile, and it's a strategy that has paid off, which is increasingly will change our value proposition as more of the U.S. defense industries seek global opportunities outside of the United States with cramped budgets here in the United States. They need to have that foreign content. So what we make in the United States, we can switch to a global set of manufacturing bases and alliances. And the fact that we're a global presence, there are some places where, let's just be frank, some places where the diplomatic relations are far better from a French-owned company than they are for a U.S.-owned company. So again, we have offset credits where many of our U.S. partners have offset obligations. our value proposition has changed because of the defense budget realities, but I think it makes us actually even stronger in the face of that competition.
You know, one of the things that struck me almost down the line about your introductions of your companies is indeed at least proportion to revenues amount of R&D that your companies undertake. What's the payoff? In one sense, it's obvious, but what's the payoff for a company, again, trying to bring business and capability to this market of having, at least again, compared to most of the pure play defense industry, a large proportion of your own R&D in play? Judy.
Yeah, I would tell you it's scale. It's being able to, especially for commercial products, being able to optimize the intellect from around the world and dual use. So you have the ability to, to solve some of the more challenging problems. I mean, think about threats like cybersecurity, and whether it's for defense or critical infrastructure. We look at that challenge, especially as it deals with industrial controls. When you think about the pervasive nature of SCADA and control systems controlling defense articles as well as commercial, if we can bring R&D to that to solve that for some of our manufacturing and plant clients throughout the world, we can either tailor it, we can bring it behind the wall of the SSA as needed, but we get to apply it. And so you're pulling from a larger talent base and larger investments.
Is it in some sense essential as a foreign-owned company because it's harder to get money to work your way up from TRL 1 or 2? Is that part of is it of necessity for a foreign-owned company, or is it just the character? Actually, the whole in European industrial base, I think, spends more on R&D than ours does generally.
I think it's, as I said earlier in my introduction, this is part of our DNA and characteristics. We're owned by owners that have a long-term perspective, and if you have such a broad product portfolio as we have, and you have readily available products, you can very easily team with U.S. industry partners and go actually out of win programs. You make the U.S. industry partners more competitive. So I think it's a very strong benefit of having a product portfolio ready to go, obviously, than waiting for an R&D program.
Right, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Michael. I mean, I think there is a cultural aspect or DNA aspect of it, certainly with Thales, where research and development and innovation is really something we try to build the brand on top of. And therefore, investing in R&D centers and innovation centers around the globe and in strategic areas has been something Thales has been willing to commit to for some number of years. Most recently here, by the way, in the U.S., where in fact we've launched an activity in concert with MIT that's really geared towards tying us into the wealth of innovation and new ideas that emerge from the institutions and small entrepreneurial businesses that come out of the U.S. And we fully expect our investment in that is going to bear fruit in connecting our companies and our businesses and our product lines to the new ideas that are coming, and to be able to grow and build our businesses on top of that. And much of that will make its way into our defense portfolio in the U.S. and abroad.
Peter?
Much like Michael, we're spending not 25%, but 13%, which is a respectable number, and certainly in comparison to many of the U.S. primes. But again, we're a tier 1 technology company, so it's almost a prerequisite to spend that amount. And for us, that totals about $2.6 billion on an annual basis this past year. We look to increase that this year. We're also invested in, that helps us actually, it helps lessen that speed bump of the speed to market.
That's what I was imagining.
For U.S., for a non-U.S. company. But the manufacturing base that we've established and grown over the past 40 years has helps us to sort of compensate for that as well. Like you, we're doing, we've centralized an R&T center back in France because of the about 3 dozen companies that we have across the group to make sure that we're not spending on similar interests. We've just started Safran Analytics to look at big data, but also because of our U.S. presence, we look for those academic partnerships, which helps us be good corporate citizens, but also build that bridge for the future engineering force, because we absolutely want to develop U.S. IP along the way as well.
And we apply the same thinking for our U.S. base as well, so we invest locally as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Each of you, I believe, each of you has alluded to partnerships as one of the pathways to participation in this market. In one respect, you know, business partnerships are pathways to all sorts of markets. What I'm interested in is your observations or comments about how forming partnerships in this market, again, in the defense and security market, is different or not for a foreign-based company, and not least because it does seem as a common denominator of each of your tactics, at least, and maybe full strategy of being in this market is having having indigenous based and home market partners, if you will. What are the tricky parts of that, or is it just like any other business partnership? They're all tricky. Anybody?
I can start. I think in general, it's not really much difference from anywhere else we go. But I would say in one sense it's easier in the U.S. because you have a huge industry base. So there's different partners for different programs, and you find a great partnership over here for this particular program, but guess what? Over here for this program we had another partnership, and sort of that also promotes or helps a very healthy dialogue, I think, within the industry. And so I don't think we've felt an issue there at all.
Yeah, I think we've all had to find the right partnerships for the right opportunity in the defense and security market. Sometimes we prime, but we tend to be a sub-supplier, whether it's a hardware element or a software element. Sometimes we'll go to market through a small business or a disadvantaged business. I mean, whatever, you kind of have to follow the market and how the customer's going to buy, and hopefully you're selling and partnering the way the customer's buying. But I haven't seen any nuances of being foreign owned that no different than
if you've
any
got the
other.
goods
You bet.
and you can make a deal.
You bet.
Yeah, I'd say there's an added dimension too. I mean, to the sense that I sense that companies like ourselves, foreign headquartered, are relatively attractive to U.S. partners right now because, in fact, with constrained defense budgets, they need to look on a much global basis, much more rigorously, and to some extent, they look at us as a channel to market, perhaps in some parts of the world, or a good partner to have in some parts of the world. So it becomes very symbiotic pretty quickly, where we've made substantial investments, as we've all talked about, in areas of technology and product that may save them in constrained times from having to make comparable investments. So we become a good partner here in the U.S. domestic market. But on the flip side of that, we become an interesting go-to-market for them elsewhere. And I think that makes these discussions with partners in the U.S. very vibrant right now.
Right, where the growing defense markets above 5% are the tiger countries of Asia.
Right.
Our home market companies who have not had to get out in those markets so often can use the advantage of your experience.
We've had to survive countries like France and Europe in general. I mean, the spending on defense has been diminished for a while, and so it's substantially lower than the U.S. And we've, by definition, had to seek out and really nurture those markets outside of Europe on an international basis. I don't know if that gives us a head start or not, but I do see us as very prominent in many parts of the world that are very attractive to the U.S.
So I have heard of that in theory, but you're saying it's real. When you make these partnerships, that's part of what they're either saying or you can detect is the attraction of working with you.
I personally think so, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, because I've certainly heard it in theory. Peter,
We're hitting the same percentage targets as what Michael was referring to earlier, which is 80% of what we produce in the home country in France is exported. So absolutely, the partnerships are essential to us, and I'll say the partnerships on the industry side. GE, of course, for the CFM engine, the new partnership, relatively speaking, with Honeywell for green taxiing, and if you haven't seen that, I strongly encourage you to look that up. With Albany International on an industrial basis to create the new fan blades for the LEAP engine that really shortened them, made them much more efficient, and they are experts in materials, and we're experts in composites, and so we joined forces. But I would add there are the other partnerships that for us, again, having companies that until 10 years ago were individual manufacturing shops for the French parent group companies, and when we came together as Safran, extraordinary level of effort on our part has been taken in combining these groups and building synergies between those groups so that we can provide a group offering to our customers, to our partners. And what they want to see is one box that shows up that says Safran with an engine in it, an engine harness, a power distribution system, et cetera, and the avionics to support it. And the last partnership I would talk about is just to, to break the mold a little bit here, is you have to partner with your end users. And our number one end user in the world is the United States government, with our security capabilities, our defense capabilities, applications, I would say, and equipment, and our commercial capabilities and security, certainly. We need to have an ongoing conversation and partnership with the United States government to ensure that our SSAs are protected, our proxy is respected, et cetera, that we are being good stewards of those assets, and moreover, that we're providing the very best technology that oftentimes is one step away because the prime takes that first seat, as they should. But they may not be aware of where our R&D monies are being spent, and we would like to have that ongoing conversation because knowing what the end user wants and needs is critically important for us to guide those investments.
I can confirm as well that the partnership goes both ways, and I have two very good examples. One is the Gripen fighter aircraft program, where depending on the configuration for each individual customer, it's up to 40 to 50% U.S. content. Mm-hmm. And of course, when you have that platform in terms of relationships, that creates business both ways. Another one is the TX program, the U.S. Air Force Next Training Aircraft. That's a partnership for the global market, not for U.S. only.
Right.
We got to win it though. Yeah.
Okay, let me turn from business strategy to public policy. Yes, we finally will get to the onerous part of among the onerous parts of doing business here. And I suppose let's start at a fairly high level, and that is to say, as a regulated marketplace, is in the scheme of doing business in foreign countries, is this an open market? Is this a welcoming market? Where are we on the doctor's scale of 1 to 10, or 0 to 10?
I will refrain from graded numbers.
How prudent.
Yes. But I would say though that it's a very welcoming market in general. I think we talked about the partnerships over and over again. That's not a problem. I think in the customer communities, and when we meet actually the end users, we're very much welcomed. So in terms of the regulatory parts of it as well, as I said earlier, if you know what you're getting yourself into and what you're up against, you prepare for that. It's part of your risk analysis, and you prepare for it. So I would say in general, not any big difference from doing business in any other region.
Yeah, I think the one exception I'd take, I absolutely agree with you, Michael, that it's open and transparent, and there's probably no more open and transparent market.
Correct.
It takes almost hourly education to explain who you are, that you're a U.S. company, that you're cleared. It truly takes that. And when you think about turnover in any of your partner companies, in your parent, in your customer set, it's just a continuous education. I call it friend-raising process each and every day.
I think I agree with that 9 days out of 10. I do think we have to be realists in the sense that, I know when in a lot of cases we're working U.S. defense programs through partners and it's really no issue at all, but in those cases we're head-to-head with the U.S. government as an end user. Certainly our competitors will play that card. And certainly make a case for the U.S. industrial base, and I sympathize with that. And as a U.S. citizen and taxpayer, I think the U.S. ought to invest in a very strong, U.S. industrial defense base, and I have no issue with that. But I couldn't say it's a non-factor. Right. It does rear its head, and I think Judy's right. You've got to have a communication strategy that very much helps the customer understand that in the U.S. we're U.S. When it comes to defense. So you really shouldn't differentiate just based on that. But I think we have to be realists as well. I will say, and we've had a very recent example in a tactical communication product where the government's made a choice to use 2 suppliers for a very significant large dollar program, and which allowed them, I'd say, to keep Thales as one of those 2 partners alongside a big U.S. customer, and then we'll fight it out on task order by task order basis. But that's okay too. But that was actually a very prudent decision, I think. They keep the competition, and then they allow the foreign company to still bring what we can bring as differentiated products. So it seemed to be a good solution. So the awareness seems to be there on the customer side as well.
So I would be remiss if I did not use the opportunity of 4 CEOs, each of whom has either an SSA or a proxy or both, to give the public record a little tutorial on what that actually means in form, but also in practice. So who would like to give us just a 3-minute tutorial on running a proxy company, and who on running an SSA? Please, don't rush forward. How about running a proxy company? Alan?
Okay. Well, as I said in my opening remarks, a proxy company allows us to be a U.S. entity, and technically puts us at arm's length from that operation. It's run by an outside board of directors, even though we're the single shareholder, 100% shareholder of the company. They make decisions as to hiring and firing, and frankly on a product by product, bid by bid basis. That said, I'd say within the proxy framework, there is a relative high degree of openness for entities to share ideas, participate in each other's processes to discuss strategy and other aspects of the business. And I would say the real key to operating a successful proxy is to ensure the best you can that you have the right leadership and team and culture within that proxy. Because at Thales, we've seen the good years, which I think we're having right now, where we have an excellent management team and who's very open and integrated with our activities at Thales. And we've seen some other years where that wasn't the case, and they could use the proxy as a barrier to having a close working relationship with the shareholders. So I don't tend to look at the organization and first think proxy. I think of the team. And when the team is open, I think you have a very successful operation. I mean, it comes at a bit of a price. There's a tax to pay to operate under a proxy organization, but I don't think it's so large that it should be a big deterrent to doing business.
And I guess perhaps I should even have saved all of you the very first rudiment on this, which is, both of these governance forms are imposed on these companies by the U.S. government in consideration of their access to classified information.
Right.
And the government's interest in creating an extraordinary, or at least a proportionate maybe, barrier to the exposure of classified information to foreign nationals, or for that matter, anyone else who's not cleared, but in this context, foreign nationals in particular. And so the Defense Security Service, or not them by name, but in law and regulation, have conceived these different forms of governance, proxy companies or special security agreement, Judy, to isolate and create a more impenetrable barrier of information flows from the classified ranks and files of the U.S. government to foreign nationals, if that's a reasonable enough setting for these arcane terms, proxy and SSA. So an SSA...
Sure, an SSA is similar to a proxy, except that you have the ability to have foreign owner members of the board, as long as they're minority members. So you get more instant communication, impact. I think we all run these companies, as you can imagine, with normal governance, as in any corporation here in the United States, in terms of committee structure, board regularity, filings, et cetera. What we tell everyone, because I think the hardest part when we're dealing with the parent is when they're U.S. people in the parent, U.S. citizens, and they say, well, wait, I'm a U.S. citizen. Why is there this disparity, or why is there this distance? I sit in another building here in D.C., and we say, but you're part of the foreign parent, and you cannot, influence us. But what I tell our team is, listen, no one needs to understand these arcane rules but us. and we need to enforce it, and we need to live by it. We're responsible for the national security imperative that's imposed upon us, that we've signed up to do. We're responsible for managing and controlling the electronic communication, which is very different than a normal U.S. company would have in terms of how we log our communications with anyone from the parent, both electronic, phone, and a lot of new technologies. We've tried to figure out how do you do this in the text environment, how do you do this, all these communications. So electronic communications are critical, but that's on us. And we make sure our employees understand that they don't feel they have to bear this to, the other 340-some thousand employees. That's on us.
And so just continuing to pull this thread, because again, I think it's an important or at least distinctive part of the kind of business that you do, the Defense Security Service. So in an SSA, please correct me if I'm wrong, you have agents of the Defense Security Service who are on your SSA or the security, help me here.
They're not part of the SSA, but there's an annual review and inspection process we all go through, which is pretty robust, not just for inspecting, as anyone would go through for classified information protection in the NISPOM, but even more so for your IT systems. So this isn't just about communication, verbal and electronic. This is about ensuring you have segmented and separate information technology systems across the board, your cost accounting, your ERP, it's all of your IT systems. Please.
A very important function of the outside directors on the board, they form the so-called Government Security Committee.
That's what I was after, thank you.
So that's a very important body.
Absolutely.
And your facility security officer or corporate security officer reports to the Government Security Board regularly about if there's any irregularities or anything to be discussed. So it's a transparent, open process, and we all understand it, I think. And
so again, I won't put you to the doctor's 0 to 10 scale. I'll strike that. But as chief executive officers of these companies, and you've run companies, each of you, or business units that didn't have this burden, give us a sense, just to give a sense of the burden of operating companies under the supervision in some sense or oversight of the Defense Security Service. How much of your day and time and concerns does that discrete piece of regulation occupy, if you can characterize it somehow?
on my day, probably none.
Okay, yeah.
In a month, a couple of hours, probably.
Okay.
And I would say I spend probably most time educating the parent. There's always a concern of the lack of impact and control for the parent. Stockholm or a business unit somewhere else around the world that has an impact or wants to have an impact or wants to be part of a decision. And to educate the parent, how do we do this? We can do it. It's just we're going to follow a certain process to get it done.
But
Any other measures? I'm sorry, Judy.
And I would tell you, our parents are used to dealing with this from an export and an ITAR perspective.
Correct.
Right.
That happens regardless of whether we're an SSA or a proxy. I mean, if you're an export company here in the United States, you're going to go through this. I mean, I agree with Michael. It's certainly a concern. It's something that weighs upon you because I think we all, besides fiduciary responsibilities, we all, at least I sit on the Government Security Committee at my company, and I do own that responsibility if there's a transgression or an issue personally. So that you do worry about. You do see people that are well-meaning people who try to give direction even though they don't mean it. I mean, email's a wonderful thing, but you know how and so you coach and counsel them back in the parent constantly. But that's what your facility security officer is monitoring. I find the only other real things versus from an investment operating cost are separate IT systems, the security protocols, and then if you didn't have cost accounting standards and that type of system for the commercial part of the company, that's obviously additional.
Yeah, no, I sit outside of the
Right.
proxy. I'm the shareholder
Yeah,
in this case, as opposed to your role, Judy.
You are the one being isolated, ironically.
Yeah, in practice, hopefully not so much. But one, I would agree that sometimes the most time you'll put into this is actually educating the parent back home.
That's interesting.
Which is because there can be a perception, well, no, don't do that in the proxy. You know, we don't have control over that. Let's do that somewhere else. And so there's an education process that's continuous back with France in my case. But you know, if I was going to put it in other terms other than a number, to me it's kind of like, you know, it's kind of like a minor sunburn. You know, and occasionally, you know, it itches or something, but you know, it doesn't preoccupy you during the course of a day. At least that's how I feel about it.
Peter? And then I'm going to take questions from the audience after this response.
You know, we all go into those, we've all entered into those arrangements with eyes wide open, understanding that our stewardship, our compliance record, et cetera, is going to affect all those other assets in which we've invested. So it has to be done, you know, with a complete understanding of all the risks attendant. We all self-report on a regular basis to make sure that that relationship is a positive one, and we're not the ones, you know, in a defensive crouch when it comes time to going through those inspections. But I will say that under the stewardship of Stan Sims and his team, it's been an extraordinarily open.
Explain to everyone whom you just
Stan
referenced.
Sims is the director of the DSS. And since his tenure, as Sean will attest to, we've had an extraordinary level of, I would say, transparent and open exchange on these issues to the benefit of growing U.S. businesses, you know, despite, I would say, the foreign ownership element, and while still keeping as the number one tenet, protection of national security-related information. So that's his task, but he has done so in a very business-like fashion, and I mean business-like in the sense of ensuring that that investment is not wasted, that we maintain profitability. The worst thing that can happen, because as other organizations will attest to, the level of foreign investment in the United States means literally millions and millions of jobs. And we pay more taxes and we pay higher payroll than most of our U.S. contemporaries. So this is a good deal for the United States government, and one that Department of Commerce rather just recently held a Invest USA conference here, where all of our U.S. ambassadors brought major industries as well as the small and medium enterprises back to show them and to impress upon them how important it is to invest here in the United States. So we're big fans.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, we were both at the Paris Air Show last week, and you know, I spent a fair amount of my time with governors of the states who are very much out there trying to lure more investment from companies like ours and more industrial presence here in the U.S.
I haven't seen the figures, but from this year, but we met with several individually with several of the governments in which of the state governors in which were invested in their states. But the last Paris Air Show 2 years ago, almost a full half of the U.S. state governors were present. And it's not to enjoy a glass of champagne in another gilded room in Paris. It's literally to bring investment dollars back into their states. And ask the people in Alabama if that's been a successful strategy that they've been pursuing over the past 10 years. And they will tell you resoundingly, yes.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate your patience. We do still have time for questions, although we will be ending sharp at 6 o'clock. Therefore, if there is an accumulation of questions, I'm going to ask you please to pace it at a rate that allow us to get through the hands that remain in the air in about 5 minutes from now. I'll start with this gentleman right here on the third row. Please do introduce yourself.
Charles Sills, Chairman of the Board, Federal Allies Institute. With regard to partnerships, even the largest U.S. defense contractors have found that it's a win-win situation to partner when appropriate with minority and so-called disadvantaged suppliers, 8A companies, woman-owned, veteran-owned, HUBZone, et cetera. So it maybe from your experience, you could say a few words about whether you're involved in that actively, and if you found what the benefits are. For example, federal agency mentor-protege programs that run for 3 years can be a real platform and vehicle for allowing the bigger companies to bid on the smaller contracts, which otherwise they couldn't bid on.
Do one of you have a particular experience with that you'd like to draw out? Judy?
I'll be happy to. I mean,
Please.
we are in a mentor-protege relationship with a small electrical distributor that serves the federal government. We deal with every element of the 8A program, and we're happy to. It works fantastic.
And we do that as well on a program-by-program basis as well.
So I will call on the gentleman with the red tie in the third row as well, whom these folks may know. Please introduce yourself.
Paul Halpern, Halpern Analytics. So on the subject of U.S. export licensing reform, not to use a 1 to 10 scale, but in terms of its ability to allow you to bring advanced technology into the U.S. with the assurance that you can get it back out, or to develop it here with the assurance that you can take it elsewhere. Is this, so far and projected where it's going, a fundamental game changer or a modest improvement, but not to the point where you would call it a game changer?
For us, it's been admittedly incremental, but we're overcoming the deeply set prejudices that came from from a Cold War scenario to which we might be returning. So that's the challenge is, are we loosening those reins at a time when we might want to be tightening them? From our perspective, I'll give you two perspectives. One from the Safran hat, and one I'll take that hat off. From the Safran perspective, it's the speed to market aspect that we have to overcome. But having those items, even if it's item by item or class by class, moved over to the CCL as opposed to the IML, that's extraordinarily helpful to us. It saved us over $12 million in a remanufacturing design that we would have had to have done for what was literally a 30-year-old INS, inertial navigation system capability that was installed on old aircraft. So it was seen by the United States government as a third-party transfer. That's ineffective for both sides. We're spending money where we don't need to be spending money, either on U.S. government oversight or for our legal fees to make that happen. From a personal standpoint, as far as those changes are occurred, we need to recognize in the United States, for all of our federal acquisition programs, whether it's security, defense, or commercially related, that we need to grow into what I would call an offensive acquisition strategy, recognizing that the majority now, if not the vast majority, of innovation is coming from overseas, coming from outside the United States. And what we seem to particularly do with our legislation is encourage a defensive approach to acquisition and says, as long as we keep it here and made in the United States, we're going to have the best product. The fact of the matter is the last place we want to find out that we've been overcome by the enemy is in the battle space. And we need to recognize that early enough so that we can overcome that now with our acquisition policies.
So is there any different experience with what I regard as the export control reform initiative that makes you hyper anxious about getting your technology trapped inside the ITAR?
I mean, we've had numerous conversations about our technology and IP, of course, and in some cases it makes, I mean, you don't want to leave it as a risk on the table. So you have to either make up your mind, are we going to put the technology in the U.S. marketplace or not? And in some cases we've just made a decision that, okay, this product is going this path for the U.S. market and it'll stay there, and we'll just make a clean break and retain the baseline back in Europe. So, it can be managed that way. But I mean, there will be times that you won't take that risk, or you can't afford to take that decision, obviously.
And none of you are from the U.S. government, but the U.S. government should worry about what it may be foregoing because of that barrier, because I'm sure sometimes you make the decision, it ain't worth the risk, but it's a good technology. Are there questions on this side of the room? Young woman right there on the third row. Third row seems to be the key place to ask, from which to ask questions.
Hi, Allison Versbrille. I'm a reporter for National Defense Magazine. And so my question, to put this in, I guess, kind of succinct terms, what would you say, the single largest challenge for doing business with the Defense Department here? And I was wondering if maybe I could get kind of.
This has been a pretty cheery conversation. What's an actual challenge? Thank you. What's a pretty hard problem still?
Yeah, I think it's a problem that's been talked about for a while, but I'd say predictability of programs and expenditures in the budget, and just timelines in which to resource, invest in, and we've certainly had our share of examples where expectations to start programs have been slipped first weeks, then months, then maybe even years, and you find yourself having made investment in resources and such that you now need to repurpose. And so to me, that timeliness is and predictability is still a significant issue.
I want the others to answer this question as well, but is that problem extra difficult for a foreign-owned company, or is that, the usual problem that all of the defense contractors are facing?
I doubt our problems are greater. In fact,
unique.
Probably
Okay.
unique in that case.
It may take another layer of explanation back to the parent.
Oh, I see. That's another 3 phone calls. Anything else on the I'd actually like to draw you all out on this. What's actually pretty hard still? Too hard? Harder than it should be?
I mean, we've been trying to address regulations in general, and I think one thing that's important going forward, we're looking at export license reform and so forth, and even FOCI mitigation, I think what industry wants is clarity and that we understand the regulations. We don't want to take any risks. So there is room for interpretation in current regulation, and that means you have to bring in expensive advisors sometimes to help you figure out, are you on the right side or the wrong side? What's the correct path here? What's going to bring you success? So I think that is what I'm looking for, more clarity. I'm not looking for, I mean, the devil's in the details, you know, and it's about the implementation and the actual stance that a particular individual might take in the process. And that's, I think.
There's not the FOCI, mitigation of foreign ownership, control, and influence is not like case law. You don't get to look at a whole long array of precedents to make your bets on
Correct.
what's going to work and how.
I think on the FOCI mitigation side and working with the DSS, I have the same experience as well. I think there's been a tremendous improvement and very business-like approach. So I'm less concerned there. It's more on the export licensing side.
Okay, on the export licensing side. Judy?
Yeah, I would tell you the challenge is not necessarily always with the U.S. Department of Defense, but we see the federal government as an enterprise customer, and we will serve them from our U.S. company anywhere they are in the world. So bases in Germany, the pivot to Asia, all of that. So when we have to apply our technology there, once we clear all the regulations and the acquisitions and the approach to acceptance testing, et cetera, we then have to do host country nation challenges too, especially on base infrastructure, power, and the like. So that's not because we're a FOCI company, but that's when you really think about where the U.S. government is doing business, there is another layer actually that gets turned the other way.
You're having to re-qualify in every jurisdiction, so to speak. Okay, and Peter?
For me, there's three. You can call them a speed bump, a Jersey barrier, and an actual roadblock. And literally depending on what we're trying to bring to the United States government or our U.S. primes, that can change. That can be scaled. The first one is speed. DSS and TAA, DSP-5 rather, which is it's a technical term, but it stands for a document that allows you to exchange technical data simply for the purpose of bidding. So it's not a full data exchange. A TAA is a technical assistance agreement. So obtaining those two permissions from the stakeholders, whether it's Commerce, State, DOD, and DHS, and sometimes all of those, is too long, just to be frank. And the second one is just an awareness, I would say, of let's say at the contracting level, both in industry and at the government and the program offices, of the benefits of working with foreign technology, and in fact, how they can make that happen without keeping them up at night and making them worry about every email that they receive. Those are the types of things that literally can be affected and shaped, but we haven't made the investment to overcome those challenges, and we need to.
Okay. I'm going to take one last, and it'll have to be a short question, and then come to each of the panelists for just a final word, and we will wrap up very near the top of the hour here. Michael, if it's a short question, please.
Thank you. Thanks for having it, Steve. Michael Bruno with Aviation Week and Space Technology. Can you quantify what kind of growth rate you see in America across the board for your companies next 5 years, 10 years, however you want to do it?
What's your outlook?
Rosy.
Yes.
Oh, come on.
Well, I'll be specific.
On a scale of 1 to 10%.
On a scale of 1 to 10, literally a 10.
Or happy faces and sad faces, whatever you
Our
like.
CFM engine business is an industrial challenge, the likes of which the aerospace industry has never seen, literally. We have 27,000 engines that are still flying, CFM legacy engines. Those engines fly for over 40 years. And now we're going to ramp up, and we have over 9,000 engines on order that we start delivering in 2016 and 2017. So we have gone from 20% revenues in the United States to 25% revenues. That is largely based on the success and the strength of that CFM joint venture. And so our partnerships will continue to grow, and all of the equipment that comes along with that. All those engines need to be powered, transmission, electrical power distribution, et cetera. And
half of them are built in Cincinnati.
Absolutely. And the other half built in, actually they're co-produced in Toulouse and France and in Cincinnati.
I mean, our
Outlook?
Our target for the portfolio of Thales in the U.S. is certainly double-digit every year. in terms of growth. Now, we happen to benefit from the fact that commercial aviation and information security are two of our strengths in the U.S., and those are both strong markets for the moment. I wouldn't expect the same outlook, nor do we target that level of growth for our defense portfolio right now, although we still expect growth.
Judy?
Very positive. As a global company, every day we're looking for where do you invest. And when you look around the rest of the world, between unconventional oil and gas, the manufacturing renaissance that's happening here in the U.S., the jobs and the skills available, although we're not a defense pure play, but high growth in the U.S.
Michael?
Generally speaking, very positive as well. We don't give out forecast indications as a publicly traded company for certain regions, so I have to be a little limited here. But in terms of our growth rate, we look very positive on that. We invest in partnerships, and I just mentioned TX, Next Generation Air Force Trainer, together with Boeing. That's going to be a big program for us if we eventually win that, and whatever comes out of that partnership, and then we've had a couple of other programs together with Boeing here recently. So, and other partnerships. So, in general, very positive outlook.
I actually think Michael set up the perfect culminating question, and so if that's all right, I will spare you a final word, and I'd also like to stay on time. Thank you very much to each and every one of you. This has been, for me, an educational conversation, and an enlightening one, and not least, and I think it was important to learn about your companies, which, as you all would agree, is always worth doing in this market. It can't be taken for granted. So I'm glad that we did it, and I appreciate all of you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.